Just days after Prince Harry landed quietly in the United Kingdom, King Charles unleashed a royal bombshell that would send shockwaves across the monarchy and the world. Behind closed palace doors, a final ultimatum was delivered. Harry must choose his title or his wife. What followed was a chain reaction of betrayal, secrets, and long-buried scandals exploding into the light. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry's return was meant to be discreet, timed delicately around the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's death, a somber occasion, one that could have symbolized a moment of healing. But the energy inside Buckingham Palace was anything but conciliatory. A message was sent to Harry's private security detail. King Charles wished to see his son alone. No aides, no advisors, no witnesses. For a family that rarely speaks without press strategy, this meeting was raw, unfiltered, devastatingly real. In that room, Charles didn't speak as a father seeking to understand. He spoke as a monarch, protecting his house. The ultimatum he issued was as cold as it was final. Divorce Meghan or surrender every last remnant of your royal legacy. The shock on Harry's face was visible, as if the father he thought he understood had vanished. What he heard wasn't a plea, it was a command, a breaking point, a line drawn in blood and crown. Harry had believed, perhaps naively, that time and distance had softened his father, that the new reign, touched by health scares and public scrutiny, had humanized Charles. But that belief shattered instantly. Charles wasn't offering redemption. He was offering exile or submission. He spoke of heritage, of bloodlines and duty, of oaths made to the people of Britain that would not be broken for love, especially not for a love surrounded by so much controversy. He cited threats, scandals, and whispers that had grown too loud to ignore. He said he'd protected Harry for as long as he could. But now, Meghan's shadow stretched too far, and it threatened to engulf the monarchy in irreversible disgrace. The room, thick with tension, soon filled with the haunting echo of Diana's memory. Charles invoked her not to weaponize her, but to remind Harry of who he once was. "She gave everything for you," he reportedly said, "and you're giving everything away for someone who's not telling you the whole truth." That moment splintered Harry. For all his rebellion, for all his anger, he'd never questioned the sincerity of his heart. But now, doubt crept in quiet, corrosive. Charles had spoken with knowledge, with certainty, as if he'd uncovered something Harry hadn't. The name Meghan suddenly became a storm cloud hovering over not just a marriage, but a legacy. This wasn't just about love or scandal. It was about the weight of inheritance. The heir and the spare had always walked different paths. But Charles had made one thing clear: there would be no room for chaos in the future of the crown. Harry was no longer just a wayward son. He had become a liability. And if he chose his wife over the monarchy, then he would be stripped of every honor that bound him to it. There would be no titles for his children, no legacy in history, just a name erased from the royal ledgers as if it had never existed. As Harry left the room, stunned and silent, palace staff noted that his usual defiance had vanished. In its place was something unfamiliar: confusion. Because for the first time, he felt the ground beneath him shift. Not because of the monarchy's coldness, but because of something else, something hidden, a whisper of a truth that had been kept from him. Charles's anger wasn't just about control. It was about fear. Fear of a secret so damaging it could reduce the monarchy to rubble. A secret that didn't begin with Harry, but with Meghan. But what was so devastating that it forced a king to pit fatherhood against duty? The answer begins not in Windsor, but in the shadowy past Meghan thought she buried forever. Before Meghan Markle became a duchess, a mother, or a global figure, she was someone else entirely. Someone with a different name, a hidden past, and a first marriage that no palace biography dared to mention. But now, whispers from Chicago allege that Meghan's journey to royalty was built on a marriage sealed in silence and a child left behind. The story begins not with tiaras and tabloids, but in the mid-1990s, on the quiet, tree-lined streets surrounding Northwestern University. Meghan was still a young woman, ambitious, radiant, and driven by dreams bigger than the city that temporarily held her. It was here that she met Joe Giuliano, the only son of a deeply rooted Italian-American family known not for wealth, but for honor. Joe wasn't part of the Hollywood circles Meghan would later conquer. He was grounded, family-oriented, and protective. Everything Meghan appeared to admire at first. Their connection, by all accounts, was immediate, magnetic, and passionate. But it was also reckless, fast, and kept far from the public eye. And now, sources close to the Giuliano family claim the relationship escalated beyond casual dating. They say it led to marriage. A marriage Meghan has spent her entire life trying to erase. Investigators tracing Meghan's early timeline found inconsistencies. Dates didn't align. Gaps in public records. Moments that simply vanished. The deeper they looked, the more they uncovered a disturbing pattern. People who once knew her either refused to speak or claimed they had been asked to forget. But the Giuliano family, proud, private, and fiercely traditional, never forgot. To them, Meghan wasn't a royal fairy tale. She was the girl who had come into their lives like a whirlwind, captivated their only son, and then disappeared, leaving chaos in her wake. Friends of the family described the tension. Meghan's bright-eyed ambition clashed violently with the Giulianos' old-world values. They wanted roots. She wanted wings. She spoke of auditions and red carpets while they prayed over Sunday dinners. She was magnetic, but evasive, brilliant, but always slightly out of reach. And it was that evasiveness that eventually shattered everything. The allegations grow darker. According to a source claiming close ties to Joe himself, the couple eloped in Las Vegas. No family present, no official announcement, just a hushed vow in a private chapel, and a marriage certificate that was never meant to see daylight. No photos, no guests, no trace. What happened afterward is even more unsettling. The marriage, already strained by conflicting visions of the future, imploded almost as quickly as it began. But there was no public divorce. Instead, there was something far more sinister, a full annulment, buried deep in sealed records, signed under conditions that no one dares discuss. And according to some insiders, those conditions included one devastating term: absolute silence. The silence wasn't born from heartbreak, it was born from consequence. The kind that alters lives. Meghan didn't just walk away from a man. She walked away from an entire identity. She reinvented herself completely, leaving behind not just a husband, but, if sources are to be believed, something far more haunting. Because what the Giuliano family never forgot, and what the palace may have only recently discovered, was that this wasn't just about love lost. There was another reason the past had to be buried, a reason that could bring down everything she built since. A reason that would make Charles's ultimatum to Harry seem not only justified, but long overdue. But what sealed this silence wasn't love lost, it was something far more permanent and human. In a secluded Italian village, a child grows up behind shuttered windows, far from the cameras that follow her alleged mother's every move. Her name is Lucia. And if the rumors are true, she's not just a ghost from Meghan's past, she's a living threat to the entire royal narrative. The silence that followed Meghan's supposed annulment with Joe Giuliano wasn't just about erasing a name or sealing a document. It was about something far more fragile and explosive: life. According to whispers that have now found their way back into the public domain, Meghan didn't just leave Joe. She left behind a pregnancy, and in doing so, made a choice that would change everything. In the quiet aftermath of that broken union, an agreement was struck behind closed doors, one not written in ink, but in fear, protection, and irrevocable sacrifice. The Giulianos, wounded and shamed by the collapse of the marriage, allegedly offered to raise the child in exchange for Meghan's silence and departure. No public announcement, no media, no trace. Only a pact that what was born in secrecy would remain in secrecy. Lucia, if she exists, was never meant to be found. Born into the shadows and hidden behind the Giulianos' thick curtains of tradition and loyalty, she became the quiet heartbeat of a family that had lost everything but her. There is no birth certificate linking her to Meghan Markle, No school records bearing her name outside Italy. Nothing that could tie her to the royal chaos unfolding oceans away. But for those who lived near the Giulianos, her presence was undeniable. Neighbors recall seeing a curious young girl peering through lace curtains, escorted always by Anna or Joseph Sr., never alone and never allowed to wander. One such neighbor, Clara, would later receive a silver bracelet in the post, inscribed with the name Lucia. No note, no sender. Just a haunting piece of a puzzle too dangerous to solve. When she asked her local priest about it, his answer was as chilling as it was cryptic. "It's bigger than all of us. Let it go." But secrets don't stay buried. Not when they threaten the like crown. In 2015, a photo surfaced online for mere minutes before it was taken down. It showed a sunlit Italian market, an American woman with a covered head, and beside her, a girl in her late teens whose face stirred instant shock among those who saw it. Her eyes, her smile, the uncanny resemblance to Meghan was impossible to dismiss. Those who caught the image before its removal claim it was like seeing a shadow of the Duchess before the fame. But it wasn't Meghan. It was someone younger. Someone who looked like she carried the weight of knowing exactly who she was and who the world believed she wasn't. This wasn't tabloid fantasy anymore. The whispers had a face. The rumors had a name. And if Lucia truly existed, her very being posed a threat to everything the royals had built around Harry and Meghan's narrative. A child left behind. A marriage scrubbed from history. A legacy built on silence and exile. And as this secret simmered just beneath the surface, a far more pressing question emerged. Had the palace known about Lucia all along? While the Giulianos vanished to protect Lucia, the palace may have known all along. And that's when Charles took matters into his own hands. Beneath the surface of royal diplomacy lies the ruthless machinery of the firm. As Meghan's star rose, so did quiet investigations. According to leaked memos and retracted tabloid exposés, King Charles ordered a private inquiry not to embarrass her, but to protect the crown from implosion. When Meghan Markle stepped into the royal spotlight, she didn't just enter a family, she entered an institution built on centuries of control, calculation, and secrecy. At first, the royal advisors smiled. They welcomed her with carefully orchestrated gestures, prepared to support Harry's choice. But behind palace walls, doubts had already begun to surface. Something in Meghan's timeline didn't align. Educational records, immigration trails, public photographs. There were subtle, unspoken gaps that only became more visible as her relationship with Harry intensified. Charles's security team flagged these irregularities early, urging quiet caution. And when whispers of a vanished family in Chicago and a silenced child in Calabria reached British ears, the investigation shifted from cautious interest to silent urgency. Royal intelligence didn't operate like tabloid gossip. It operated in shadows, through retired agents and discreet international contacts. A network far older than any press office. The name Giuliano surfaced more than once. A second-generation Italian-American family with strong cultural ties and a reputation for discretion. The problem wasn't that they had vanished. It was how thoroughly they had erased themselves. No forwarding address, no paper trail, no financial activity that could be traced beyond a few cash-based transactions in southern Italy. It was too perfect, too deliberate. And in a monarchy that depends on controlling narrative, unpredictability is the greatest threat of all. Then came the leak. A redacted document discovered by an anonymous source and leaked to a now-defunct investigative blog. Its title was chilling in its simplicity: Operation Silhouette. The contents, though fragmented, painted a grim picture. References to non-disclosed prior union, foreign minor, and probable breach of royal security standards. A report authored by palace aides, intelligence staff, and at least one former MI5 officer. Though the royal family denied its existence, digital forensics confirmed metadata matching internal systems within Clarence House. It was a silent admission that the crown was already investigating one of its own before she ever wore a tiara. Even more revealing was the discovery of image metadata linked to a photograph taken in Calabria just months before Meghan's official debut with Prince Harry. The image never made it to the tabloids, but it was enough for Charles to act. In the weeks leading up to the royal wedding, sources say Charles made an unscheduled trip, allegedly disguised under the pretext of a diplomatic meeting. The location remains undisclosed. The purpose? Unknown. But whispers inside the palace suggest he may have attempted to confront the reality of the rumors himself. Whether he met Lucia, or anyone at all, is still a matter of speculation. But something changed after that journey. The king returned graver, more reserved, and more protective of the crown than ever before. And that's when everything inside the palace shifted. Titles were discussed behind closed doors. Staff were vetted again. Legal teams were quietly activated to prepare contingency plans should the past erupt into public view. Meghan's integration into the royal family continued, but now under watchful eyes. Not out of prejudice, but because the monarchy, already bruised by scandal, could not afford another wound. Charles wasn't acting as a father-in-law. He was acting as sovereign, guarding a throne from collapse. But even as files were secured and risks assessed, he didn't expect the next betrayal to come not from Meghan's past, but from her own actions in the present. But just as Charles uncovered the past, another betrayal emerged not from files, but from Meghan's own calculated actions in the present. Behind the scenes of royal engagements and photo ops, something sinister was unfolding. Meghan's alleged efforts to get close to Prince Andrew weren't just casual encounters. Insiders now suggest she attempted to forge private alliances. Alliances that would later haunt Harry and enrage the king. Long before wedding bells echoed through Windsor, long before Harry and Meghan became the center of global fascination and controversy, there were whispers. Whispers that Meghan had her sights set not only on the spotlight, but on certain players within the royal family who held far more than ceremonial influence. Among them, Prince Andrew. Though his reputation had already begun to fracture under the weight of scandal, Andrew still wielded connections that stretched across continents, from defense contractors to offshore financiers. And now, palace insiders allege that Meghan's frequent interactions with him during early royal events were far more deliberate than anyone had realized. Not fleeting gestures of courtesy, but sustained moments of quiet conversation, exchanged contacts, and subtle alignment behind closed doors. What followed next sent alarm bells ringing through the royal establishment. Leaked emails allegedly intercepted and then quickly buried showed Meghan corresponding with an associate of Andrew's regarding a potential strategic partnership. The language was vague but unmistakably calculated. Mentions of soft influence, global footprint, and alternative networks pointed toward something that had little to do with philanthropy and everything to do with power. The context was damning, especially as these communications predated her official engagement to Harry. While the public saw a love story, those within the firm saw the emergence of a blueprint, a methodical plan that seemed to prioritize access over affection. Tensions between Charles and Andrew, already strained by years of unresolved scandals, now erupted into something volatile. Charles, who had worked relentlessly to isolate his brother from royal duties, suddenly found Meghan repositioning Andrew back into the center of critical conversations. Palace staff reported hushed arguments between Charles and senior aides, with one overheard, quote, ringing through the halls of Clarence House. She's not just marrying into this family, she's trying to remap it. Meghan, for her part, never acknowledged the claims, but her silence only intensified the speculation. The fact that Andrew refused to publicly deny the rumors didn't help either. Instead, he retreated further into obscurity, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and speculative headlines. But the person most shattered by the revelations wasn't Charles. It was Harry. When confronted with the allegations backed by metadata, travel logs, and suspicious overlaps in event attendance, Harry reportedly spiraled into confusion and rage. The woman he had defended before the world now appeared to be weaving relationships behind his back with the very family members he had worked so hard to distance himself from. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. And for a man who had sacrificed everything for love, It felt like the foundation of his world had been pulled from beneath him. Charles, ever the pragmatist, didn't see it as personal failure, he saw it as confirmation. Meghan wasn't integrating into the monarchy, she was exploiting it. To Charles, this wasn't marriage, it was manipulation, a calculated ascent cloaked in romance. And in that realization, the monarchy shifted its position from wary tolerance to outright resistance. Security protocols were tightened, communications monitored, access revoked. Meghan had stepped too far, not just by resurrecting Andrew's influence but by crossing the invisible line between royal formality and institutional threat. As the betrayal deepened, Harry reached his breaking point, and what he did next would change everything. Alone in a palace hallway once filled with childhood memories, Harry faced the one question he never thought he'd hear. Would Diana approve of what you've become? What followed was an emotional collapse, one that pitted son against father, husband against truth, and duty against love. The confrontation with Charles had reached a boiling point. No longer buffered by protocol or politeness, father and son stood stripped of titles, of pretense, of everything but raw emotion. Charles, now cornered by the burden of secrets and the specter of public scandal, could no longer shield Harry from the place, truth, or from the consequences of his choices. He spoke not as a monarch, but as a man pushed beyond restraint. And when he asked that question invoking Diana, not as a symbol, but as a mother, it landed with surgical precision. For Harry, it wasn't an accusation, it was devastation. A collapse of identity. Diana had always been his compass, his justification for defiance, his reason for protecting Meghan at all costs. But in that moment, doubt flooded in, and with it, a quiet, irreparable fracture. Later that evening, in the private quarters of the palace, Princess Anne handed Harry a box, one that had remained sealed since his mother's death. Inside were letters, written in Diana's own hand, words filled with love, warnings, and visions of a future she feared she wouldn't live to see. One letter, in particular, struck Harry like lightning. Diana wrote of trust, of manipulation cloaked in charm, and of how legacy must never be surrendered for illusion. Whether the words were coincidence or prophecy, Harry felt as though she was speaking directly to him. He wept, not for the first time but this time, for everything. The mother he lost, the man he had become, and the family he no longer knew how to defend. Meghan, when told of the confrontation, did not break. She calculated. Her concern, reportedly, was not the emotional toll, but the optics. Damage control replaced dialogue. Plans for their next public appearance were reviewed. Statements were drafted. She urged him not to react emotionally ironically, as he was barely holding himself together. It was the coldness, more than anything, that broke him. Not the fallout from Charles, not the security being revoked, not even the temporary suspension of his inheritance, but the chilling realization that the very love he had fought to protect might have been built on a carefully crafted facade. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Harry reached out to the one person he had once considered his rival, William. The phone call was brief, but it opened a door long sealed. William listened. Not as a future king, not as a scorned brother, but as someone who knew exactly what it meant to grieve Diana again and again, every time the family tore itself further apart. It was the first flicker of reconciliation. Small, fragile, but real. And though the world would never hear that conversation, it marked the moment Harry realized he wasn't as alone as he thought. Back in the palace, Charles made a quiet decision. He would begin publicly distancing the crown from Harry, not out of vengeance, but necessity. The institution could not afford to sink into Meghan's shadow. Staff were instructed to reroute communications. Legal teams prepared for contingencies. And in a sign of how far things had fallen, official photos were updated to reflect the new line of succession, one without Harry's name on it. The monarchy wasn't collapsing. It was recalibrating. And Harry, once a beloved rogue prince, now stood outside the gates of the only home he had ever known. And while the world watched for a statement from the Sussexes, a new player stepped into the spotlight with revelations that blew the roof off the palace. After decades of silence, the man at the center of Meghan's vanished past, Joe Giuliano, has spoken. In a hidden interview leaked by a European investigative outlet, he tells it all. The wedding, the child, and the deal made in blood and silence. The palace had tried to suppress it, but the truth was out. The footage was grainy, the setting undisclosed, but the voice was unmistakably steady. Joe Giuliano, once a shadow name, whispered in corners of conspiracy forums, sat down across from a journalist known only by initials, speaking not as a man seeking revenge, but as a father unburdening himself of a haunting truth. For years, he had honored the silence. For years, he had watched Meghan ascend a throne built on selective memory. But now, he claimed, the burden had become too great. And with eyes that bore the weight of decades, he said the words that would unravel the royal fabric thread by thread. Yes, we were married. Yes, she was pregnant. And yes, they knew. Joe described their whirlwind romance, how Meghan had dazzled not just him, but his entire family. How her ambitions weren't a secret, but a fire that consumed everything in its path. He painted a picture of a young woman desperate to escape the confines of normality, one who feared obscurity more than failure. He admitted he loved her deeply, but that love was not enough to anchor someone who saw fame as salvation. And then came the child, Lucia, a life that should have grounded them both, but instead became the bargaining chip in a devastating negotiation. Joe's voice cracked only once when he described the moment he signed the paperwork, relinquishing not just the marriage, but his role in his daughter's life. "I didn't give her up," he said. "I was told this was the only way to protect her. To protect all of us." But what came next shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Joe revealed that years later, after Meghan's engagement to Prince Harry was made public, he was approached discreetly. Not by Meghan, not by lawyers, but by what he referred to as a royal intermediary, a man who carried no official title but made it clear he represented the firm. The message was simple: remain silent or risk everything. He claimed a non-disclosure agreement was drawn up, paired with a financial incentive that he refused. "I didn't want their money," Joe said. "I wanted to believe the silence would eventually mean peace, but it never came." Within hours of the interview's leak, the internet erupted. Hashtags trended across continents. Legacy media scrambled to confirm the story, only to find the video wiped from every major platform within 24 hours. The journalist who conducted the interview went dark. Social accounts vanished. Even Mirror sites were mysteriously scrubbed. But the damage had been done. The words were out there. The name, Lucia, had been spoken by the one person who was never supposed to speak. And even if the footage disappeared, screenshots, transcripts, and whispers surged like wildfire. Behind the gates of the palace, the fallout was immediate. Damage control teams issued stern, no comments. Legal threats were quietly dispatched, but the illusion of stability had cracked wide open. The world now had a name, a voice, a witness, and for the first time, the royals were on the defensive, not from rumor, but from a man who had nothing left to lose. Joe Giuliano wasn't just an ex-husband. He was the last living link to a secret too volatile to contain. And just when it seemed the monarchy had weathered the worst, a final twist shattered any illusions of resolution. A sealed envelope bearing the king's crest was hand-delivered to Harry's residence in Montecito. Inside was a decree not just about titles, but about the truth. For the first time in modern royal history, a monarch acted not to preserve blood, but to erase shame. The letter was brief, but the implications were monumental. Charles, weary from the storm that had threatened to drown the institution he had spent a lifetime preparing to lead, finally drew a line in ink that would echo through generations. In it, he announced the formal revocation of all honorary military titles and royal patronages previously granted to Prince Harry. There would be no more ceremonial salutes, no more Commonwealth tours, no more behind-the-scenes influence. Harry, once considered the monarchy's wild card with a heart, was now officially and symbolically severed from the institution that raised him. The decision had not come easily, but after the revelations surrounding Meghan's secret past, the resurfacing of a hidden child, and the undeniable stain of betrayal, Charles saw no other path forward. It was not about vengeance, it was about survival. But the blow did not end there. Meghan, too, was purged, quietly, methodically, without public spectacle. Her name, once etched into internal royal databases for security, correspondence, and ceremonial protocol, was scrubbed from the system. Sources within palace administration confirmed that passwords were changed, email access removed, and all correspondence rerouted through legal channels. She was, for all intents and purposes, no longer affiliated with the House of Windsor. What began as a fairy tale had collapsed into a classified red list, a name not to be spoken, except in strategy briefings behind locked doors. Then came the gesture that made it clear this was not just a bureaucratic decision, but a personal reckoning. Charles ordered the return of Diana's sapphire brooch, once given in private to Harry, as a symbol of maternal love and legacy. It was retrieved through royal channels and restored to the Crown's private collection. That singular act was not lost on insiders. It was as if Charles had declared the memory of Diana too sacred to be entangled in what had become a narrative of deception and division. For a man accused of emotional detachment for most of his life, this move was piercing in its finality. He was reclaiming not just the monarchy, but his mother's story. Clarence House followed with a carefully worded statement. The integrity of the monarchy must be restored. All decisions have been made with the long-term interest of the Crown and the Commonwealth in mind. The words were cold, surgical, but behind them was a monarchy reeling from private chaos and determined to project unshakable resolve. Harry, reportedly shattered, offered no public comment. Meghan remained equally silent, her legal team issuing only a brief denial of involvement with unsubstantiated family fabrications. But the damage had been done. The world had shifted. A prince had been exiled not by force, but by decree. And behind that sealed letter was a monarch who had chosen duty over blood. And yet, in the quiet corners of the palace, one entry remained unspoken. Whispers circled of a confidential royal ledger updated in secret, one that now included a name never intended to surface: Lucia. Sources close to the royal legal team hinted at a classified designation, not as heir, but as an entity of historic interest. The implications were staggering. A girl born in the shadows, now acknowledged in the margins of monarchy's most guarded records, not legitimized, but never again ignored. But even in loss, there is rebirth, and as the monarchy turns the page, one name continues to haunt its margins. In a sun-drenched villa by the Ionian Sea, a young woman writes in her journal, unaware or perhaps fully aware of the kingdom her birth was meant to disrupt. Lucia remains the enigma the monarchy can't erase, and with one appearance, she could undo everything the Windsors fought to control. For decades, her existence was reduced to whispers, rumors, and sealed records buried beneath the weight of royal silence. But now, in the wake of Joe Giuliano's earth-shattering revelations and the seismic decree issued from Montecito to London, the question is no longer if Lucia exists, but where. Speculation swirls that the young woman once hidden in Calabria has long known who she is, that her guardians, those left behind in the Giuliano family's quiet exile, have carefully raised her not just in secrecy, but in awareness, that every step of her upbringing, every missed birthday party, every unanswered question about her mother was a thread weaving her toward the truth. And now, as the world catches its breath from the chaos unleashed by the Sussexes' unraveling, Lucia hovers like a phantom between fact and reckoning. The hunt to find her has become an obsession. International journalists have redirected resources to the Italian coast. Private investigators hired by media conglomerates have begun, probing old immigration records, bank transfers, and parish registries long thought irrelevant. Every blurry photo of a young woman walking near the sea or exiting a remote chapel is dissected online. Reddit threads and underground forums post speculative timelines and travel patterns. AI-generated reconstructions of what Lucia might look like at 28 circulate with viral intensity, some eerily resembling Meghan in her early years, others bearing features that hint at a life untouched by royal polish, shaped instead by silence and solitude. But all of it, every photo, every theory, carries with it a single burning question. Will she ever step forward? Inside the palace, the atmosphere is not just anxious, it's terrified. Aides have quietly confessed their unease, warning senior officials that third parties may attempt unauthorized contact with Lucia. Foreign tabloids, opportunistic documentarians, even disillusioned former royal staff all reportedly seek access to the woman who could rewrite royal lineage. And behind those closed doors, one rumor continues to echo with haunting persistence: that King Charles himself, in a gesture that shocked even his closest advisors, is considering the establishment of a private trust in Lucia's name. Not public acknowledgement, not legitimacy, but a quiet insurance policy, a symbolic offering to a shadow the monarchy can no longer deny. And then, as if to seal the moment with a whisper rather than a roar, Joe Giuliano was asked whether he believed Lucia would ever speak. He paused, visibly moved, and said only this: "The truth always finds a way home." With that, the cameras cut. But the implications remained. Somewhere across the sea, a woman carries a story that was never meant to be told, a name not inked into the royal register, but etched into the conscience of a crumbling empire. And if she chooses to emerge, the world will not just witness a scandal, it will confront a legacy born in shadows and built on silence. And as one royal chapter closes with tears and betrayal, another silently waits in the wings, ready to reclaim the crown of lost identity. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.